All right. What did we learn yesterday? What are, more importantly, some concepts that we started on yesterday that we are seeing in our movie project?
We learned that you cannot, what is it, loop over an object. You have
Without
to,
help, right? What did we use in order to get that help?
object that,
Entries? Object.entries, right? Which was basically saying, hey, give us a list of all the entries in this object, and then we can loop over it from there, right? So object.entry is really good tool. Doug did mention a different loop yesterday called a for in loop. And a for in loop basically does the same thing a for of loop does if you use it with object.keys. So as you're going through free code camp, you may go, I remember something with a for in loop in objects. You can loop over all of the keys in the objects, but when you're working with both the key and the value inside of that object, it is more helpful to use that object.entries. We saw a little bit of nth child yesterday in our CSS, the way that we can pick certain CSS items without having to add another class or ID to them. We saw off our first object in an object, and we'll be seeing a lot of objects, in arrays, in objects, and all kinds of configurations when we get into API calls with Ryan, right? And so that is really important to be able to peel back and get into that object, whether it's using an index in an array or the key. Those are all important practices and things to keep in mind, right? Hey, do I want to access this data by saying what index it's at, what number it's at, or do I want to access this data by using the key or the property in that object, right? Dot price or dot seats, or being able to use the movie title instead of what number movie it is. So all important things. We also saw adding drop-down options in JavaScript, right? And how we put them into the JavaScript. Into the HTML, right? All of those steps that it took to generate out the options. We saw the template literal for the first time, right? Instead of having to concatenate, basically, instead of having to add all of these strings together, we can use one template literal and that $ curly bracket syntax to say, just drop these values into our template, into our string. So it's basically saying a template literal, break that down into two parts. What's a template? Well, it's something that the final thing should look like, right? It's a model, it's prototype. And then a literal is saying, all right, when this template actually gets filled in, the literal value of it will be a string. So that's how I think of a template literal. And a template literal is one of those things that I use all the time and forget the name of it. And so I actually was in a job interview once, and the person interviewing me had a bunch of just rapid fire questions around JavaScript. And one of them is, what's the template literal? And I'm like, right? And my brain freezes up as it does in an interview. And I'm like, I've heard of that before. I'm not making it up, but my memory is not pulling it out. And so I said, all right, can you give me a hint? And he said backticks. And I went, boom, immediately know what I'm doing. Template literal, that's when you use your $ curly braces. It's a way to avoid concatenation. And he said, check, on to the next question, right? So very powerful tool. Syntax is a little weird to get used to it, but once you do, very helpful to be able to build out a string without having to use a bunch of concatenation. We also saw event target value, and we saw that before in our weather application as well, right? Basically, hey, when something gets changed, when something gets selected, what value got selected? Well, by default in a dropdown, that value text is going to be whatever is between the opening and closing option tag, right? The content of that tag. However, we ran into a problem where that pricing data was coming back in. And so we didn't want the pricing data. We only wanted the movie name. And because of that, we used that value, right? We went back, we modified our code a little bit, we put that value on it. And because of that, we were able to not only get what movie was selected, but use that information to go back into our movie object and pull out information like seats and price and stuff like that. We saw the movie dropdown.inner HTML equals options. That's how we bridge the gap between our JavaScript, the strings that we generated, and our HTML using the document object model to place that content back in to the page. And Natasha, we kind of use the script tag for it. There are two different ways we can use a script tag. We can either put a script tag and then inside of it, put our JavaScript and the browser will run that JavaScript. Or we can do what we did, which is use the SRC attribute. And that SRC attribute said, hey, go to script.js and go run anything that's in script.js. So because it was in the script tag and it was linked to an external file, it knew that external file was JavaScript. It's the same exact way we link into our CSS, right? We did our link rel style sheet and we said style.css. Well, because we set that rel to style sheet, it knew, hey, whatever I'm pulling in from that file, interpret that and run that as CSS. But we don't have to do it that way, right? We could put a style tag up in our head and put all of our CSS right in there, just like we could use a script tag and put our JavaScript right between the script. However, unless we only have a quick little JavaScript snippet or a quick little CSS snippet, it's generally considered best practice to link out to an external file. So that way it's three very clearly separate. Here's my HTML, here's my CSS, here is my JavaScript.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. We did see objects within objects. I can't remember if that's the first time we saw that. I think we also played around with that in our JavaScript homework, but it's not just a matter of pushing you guys. It is really up to the data, right? And we're going to see with the seats array a little bit later tonight that not only can we put objects in objects or arrays in objects, we can also put arrays in arrays. So tonight we are going to see our first multi-dimensional array. We are headed into the Spider-Verse. No, just kidding. But we are getting around, playing around. We're going to actually have a coordinate system and see how we use an array in an array to pull out the data that we want. And just to further complicate things, that array of arrays is going to hold objects inside of it. So it's really going very deep into the layers of inception here to pull out the data that we're working on. Tara mentioned double and triple checking spelling, the difference between movie selected and movies selected, the difference between movie selected and movie select. All different things, right? So we want to be careful on our consistency, making sure that we've got all of that spelling down. And then on top of that, taking a step back and going, all right, I got it working. It's working the way Max is working. Do I understand why it's working that way? Do I understand how we came up with that method or what we're trying to tell the computer to do with that? Definitely important as we're working on our code. Yes, Natasha, when we use the average, we were working with objects and objects. We also used the loop. And unfortunately, that loop is not staying out of our code for much longer. We're going to be diving into a loop tonight. And we aren't going to use a for of loop. We are going to have to use that harder kind of loop to use with the iterator, the incrementer, basically the three-part for loop. So we're going to dive into that tonight and see our first real-world example of using a different kind of for loop and why we need to be able to do that. Yes, Kenny, you can put in that SRC tag, instead of putting in like just script.js, you can actually put in a URL there. And it works just the same way our link tags work, right? So if you think about how we pulled in Google Fonts, we did our link href and we said HTTPS, fonts.google.com/yada, yada, yada .css. We can do that same exact thing for our script tags. We can link to a script tag. In fact, we did that with our Bootstrap, right? When we pulled Bootstrap in, we linked to their external site and pulled in their JavaScript that way. So we definitely can do that. Let's try and keep Rick and Morty out of this. I would like to not have to become a Rick level teacher, scientist, explorer. But yes, I am a Rick and Morty fan. In fact, you can actually use the voice command in my car and say keep Summer safe, and it will activate like Sentry mode. One of my favorite features. Yes, cars with software updates. A lot of fun. Okay. Anything else from yesterday? Did we have any questions that popped up? Is there anything from our code that we let kind of marinate yesterday, and today we're like, I don't really know what we were trying to do there or why the JavaScript is working?
Max,
Yes.
so you remember how yesterday when I was asking about the options versus the span, and you say you can kind of use to do the genre? How would you know how to dictate whether you should use the span versus the option on a project, and that when you're doing something like that?
It really depends on what do you think is easier for the end user, right? So there's kind of different ways of thinking about it. One is hey, do I want the user to more click on a link, and because it's a link, it's going to take them to like an entirely separate page? Or is this something where maybe I'm building a product filter page, right? And I'm basically saying, hey, when you change this dropdown, all of these other dropdowns are going to change. There is no like de facto right answer to that. It's kind of like naming your variables, right? We called it movie title. Someone else may call it movie name, and the computer doesn't care what you call it as long as you call it that consistently. And in fact, this is something that is always ongoing, right? If we look at what the Amazon homepage looked like 5 years ago to what the Amazon homepage looks like today, totally different, right? And Amazon tests things. There's something called A/B testing, where you release two different interfaces with some analytics. So they both accomplish the same exact thing, but to half the users, you show them one interface, and to the other half of users, you show them the other interface. And then you look at metrics, right? Like how often did the user actually click on that drop down versus clicking on the link? How often did the user stay on the page? Did the user interact with the links more than the other user that got the drop downs? And you can kind of go over time once you've got your first interface out and say, all right, which one of these is more efficient? Which one of these is getting used more? And that's the design that you end up going for. So there isn't really a black and white answer to say like, oh, you always use a drop down when, because you could say, oh, instead of a drop down, I want multiple choice questions. We actually designed like a survey interface, and what we decided at our company was if there were less than 8 options, we would show all of the options as multiple choice, and they would have a little radio button next to them and they could click on it. But as soon as there got to be more than 8 options, we changed it to a drop down, and instead the user would select the drop down, see all the answers, and pick on it that way. So it really depends on which way do you want your user to interact with it. And if the answer is, well, I'm really torn between these two different options, You can get into testing tools like A/B testing, where you can actually ship out 2 different versions of the interface, get back the results of how your users interacted with it, and then decide which one of them is better. The end of the day, it doesn't really matter. And depending on what kind of company you're working in, you will hopefully be working with a designer, and that designer will make that choice for you in the mockups, right? But if you're working at a smaller company, if you're making all the design decisions on your own, sometimes you just have to say, all right, I think this interface is going to be the best way. And if I get feedback on that from end users, I could always change that over to a different one. So just like there are multiple ways of writing our JavaScript to accomplish the same exact goal, or styling our CSS to get the same exact output, there are multiple interfaces that we could design, all of which would be functional, but then we have to kind of go back in and analyze them and say, hey, is there a more efficient way for the user to build this? And if there is, switching it over and redesigning it to that.
Okay, I'm definitely picking up what you're putting down. So it really just depends on what's easier for our consumer. Thank you.
Exactly. And you may look at that and say, everyone gets personal design preferences. So you may be like, you know what, I hate working with selects. I would much rather have radio buttons at the top. And if we pick on a radio button, that's what changes the movie over. Okay, right? Like, I don't agree with you, but that doesn't mean that you're wrong or that I'm right. That just means that, hey, you had a different design inspiration, and you want to leave that up to the users to decide that. Another really helpful way of deciding that is if you're building your first app, chances are you're not going to be a designer, right? Chances are you're not going to have a ton of experience with it. So go find someone else's webpage, right? Go look and say, hey, did someone else make this app? Maybe I'm not remaking their whole app, but I know I'm building a product page that's supposed to show search results. Let me go on Amazon and Walmart and Target, and let me look at what their interfaces are doing, because I may pick up a couple things that I like that Target's doing, and I may pick up a couple things that I like Amazon is doing, and I may pick up a couple things that I don't like Walmart is doing, and I'm going to incorporate that all into my design, right? We don't need to reinvent the wheel here. There's a phrase that I love of we always stand on the shoulders of giants when we are developing software, right? We do not have to come up with these things out of the box for the first time. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. Someone else has already figured out how to make a product page that is filterable down to what we're looking for, right? Someone has already thought, hey, you know what? We want to sell movie tickets online. We've got a way of displaying the seats, or selecting them, or choosing between different movies. There is absolutely nothing wrong with going out, seeing how other people have done that, and then integrating that into your design and replicating a part of it. Natasha, your the description that you mentioned, it could be data analytics for sure, like Corwin mentioned. It could be SEO, site engine optimization. That is basically, how do I make the site be easier for Google to ingest? And because of that, they're going to promote me higher up on the search rankings. That is Eva's domain of excellence, of expertise, I should say. So SEO is definitely something. But yes, that all kind of falls into analytics, and site tracking. Google Analytics is the #1 tool for that. That basically says, hey, how are users interacting with my website or my app? How long do they spend on each page? What links do they click on? Do they scroll down the page? All of that gets into Google Analytics, or analytics in general. I'm not a huge expert in that area, but to pull it back to, was it Kenny's question maybe? about using external JavaScript links. That's exactly how we pull in Google Analytics. We use an external JavaScript link that pulls in all the JavaScript code that Google has written, and then that's what gets all of the data reporting to come in and to show you how long people are spending on your web page, what pages they're spending it on, what regions they're from. Are they all from Central New York? Are they coming from California? What's the demographic ratio? Are you getting more male visitors or female visitors, or all kinds of really cool stuff that Google can provide you information about the site.
It popped up the day after I had my one-on-one with Laura, so that was pretty cool. But like, there are so many different types of fields to enter. Like she said it, but looking at it, it was like, no way. And then they had so many remote options. It was crazy. But yeah, good to see.
Yeah. So Palash sent me a message today and said, hey, there's group pricing on JavaScript 30. Would you recommend students, do JavaScript 30? And I said, well, it really depends, right? You may get to the end of JavaScript and say, I am just holding on by the skin of my teeth. I'm going to get through the end of the program, and then I never want to touch JavaScript another day in my life. Okay, that's all right. I really love JavaScript, but you could decide that I want to become a front-end designer, and I never want to write another line of code in my life. But what I want to do is become a Figma expert, and I'm going to learn all about Figma and learn all about design principles and how colors work together and how we can use borders and shading to add in dimension to the design. And all I want to do is design interfaces. Great. If you can get a job doing that, if that's what you want to do, that is a perfect outcome of our program. Just because we are training you guys to be full stack web developers does not mean that you have to become a full stack web developer, because it turns out, even as a front end designer, you're going to take things that you learn from this course and go, oh, the developer is probably going to implement this with a 12-column grid. So in my design, if I lay things out so that they are column friendly, they'll be much easier for the developer to implement. You may get it on the other end of this and say, you know what, databases are really cool, SQL is really cool, I want to be a data analyst. Well, you're probably not going to be using JavaScript to do your data analyses, but you're probably going to be using something like R or Python, where, shocker, there are still data types like objects and arrays. They happen to be called dictionaries and lists in Python. There are still for loops. There are still all of those functions and the concepts that you're learning. Those are going to be directly applicable, right? So as you're going through the program, at the end of every week or at the end of every module, kind of give yourself a check in there and say, hey, would I want to be doing this every single day? Is this what I want to get paid to do? Because the answer may be, nope, I hated SQL. I don't want to touch SQL. SQL is nasty. I don't want to do that another day in my life. Okay, that's fine, right? That full stack web developer job, one reason that I love being a full stack developer is that there are so many different hats that you can wear, right? You can go into DevOps and you can deploy your apps. You have to go into the back end and build your own APIs. You do have to work with the databases. You do have to then go into the front end and say, how do we use JavaScript to pull this data in? You do need to do a touch of design and figure out how we're going to display this to the user. You do need to get that HTML and that CSS working, right? So full stack developer is really spanning all of these different modules that we're covering, but it is entirely possible to take any one of these modules and make a full-time career out of just one of them. So that is something to keep in mind. Eva, I am a Slack admin for CIC C5 in case you need anything there.
Just if people
Coursera,
want to contact me with questions about SEO, so we can, so I appear in this thread too.
yeah, let me throw you in that channel.
Thanks.
And Jillian, if you join Slack, I can also add you to that. Just shoot me a message and I will get you added in.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Okay. That was a good old healthy Max rant. Sorry for getting us off track. Any other questions before we dive into our code? You got to learn to be careful when you get me going on a rant because I love to rant. Oh, we're good to dive into code. Hopefully we're not sweating over our keyboards too much. Okay, let's go ahead and dive in. So I am going to start by heading to my code folder, to my week 8. I'm going to go to my day 1 and I am going to right click on it and duplicate it. I'm going to rename it to day 2. I'm going to pop open my day 2 in VS Code. I am going to get a live share going and find the chat. And live share is set up there. I'm going to hit my go live button. That will pop open my movies where I left it off, and I will give you guys a minute. I'm going to pop open my index.html and my script.html. And I'm going to move my script down to the second half of the screen. Hopefully, VS Code, why do you hate me? Oh, screw it. Okay, here we go. Close out my files. And don't forget to go live. Make sure that we can see all of our seats here. I'll also share my server in case you want to open the copy of my code that I am working on in your browser. All right, anyone need a minute before we dive in? Anyone having issues? Okie doke. So, Kenny, we are going to knock that number down. We are at almost 200 lines of code, but I forget who it was asked yesterday, isn't there a more efficient way of generating all of these chairs? Because we had to copy and paste a bunch of different code, and this code is certainly not DRY, don't repeat yourself, right? We are certainly repeating ourselves over and over and over again. But before we can generate out all of those chairs, we need to actually keep track of all of the different seats, right? Because basically we need to know whether a seat is occupied or not. And in addition to it being occupied or not, we also need to know if that seat is selected or not, because when we click on that seat, we need to be able to keep track of that. Okay, well, how would we do that? If we start, and you don't have to follow me on this step, I'm kind of just thinking about some information here, right? So I'm like, all right, if I were to keep track of all of my seats in JavaScript, what would that data look like? Well, first of all, the seats are different for every different movie. That's why we have seats for every different movie in our object here. And we made them an array because we want to keep track of them using the row number and the column number of those seats. Okay, but I just said we have to keep track of a couple different pieces of information. we have to be able to keep track of whether or not the seat was occupied or whether or not we have that seat selected. Well, I want to be able to reference those by dot selected or dot occupied. So I know I need an object. So let's just say I'm going to have one seat that's occupied true, and I might have another seat that is selected true. In other words, I clicked on it. Okay, but now I've got two seats and I'm looking at this and I'm like, all right, that could be this seat and this seat. But how do I take care of all of these seats going down?
Given selecting each divs.
We're not going to use it using the divs. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to make sure our JavaScript object is set up to store all of the seat information. Once we get our object to contain all of that seat information, we can then use those arrays to generate out all of the divs and the spans that we need. So what I want to do is I want to say, hey, this is one row of seats. How do I deal with the next row of seats? Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use an array inside an array. I'm going to say, all right, in the next row of seats, let's say the next one is selected, and then there may be an occupied seat and it's not occupied. And then we would keep going all the way across until we got all of our different seats. Okay, we could tackle that, but the problem that we're going to run into is then we have to generate out not only 64 seats, we have to generate out 64 seats for each one of the movies. That's a lot going on. What if we try and use a for loop to generate out each movie's seats? Okay, how would we go about Go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. I was going so when we make that for loop, is the number, like the total number of seasons going to be the same for each theater? So that is going to be a constant, correct?
Correct. So what we're going to do is we say, all right, first things first, I'm going to come down here, and this is where we left off, right? Make the seat show up when the movie is selected. Well, in order to make the seat show up, we have to have the data about the seats, right? We have to know how many seats there are, if they're occupied, what's going on there. So what we're going to do is we're going to loop over each one of the movies. Well, in order to loop over each one of the movies, we are going to do a for loop that says for const movie of, and you know what, let's call this movie movie data of object dot values. So instead of using our entries where we're getting the movie title and the movie data, at this point we're only getting the values, right? We're only getting the data that's inside that object of our movies. And to make sure this loop is working, I'm going to console log out my movie data. So I come over to my console, I pop open the inspect, I check in the console, and I get all of these objects, which gives us access to the price and the seats. Okay, now what do I want to do? Well, I want to loop over and make 8 seats for the first, I'm sorry, I want to make 8 rows. And after I make all 8 rows, I want to make 8 columns worth of seats. Okay, so let's think about how we do that. I'm going to say for, and I'm going to say let let row iterator equals 0. Why 0? Well, it's starting out at the 0 index, and then it's going to go all the way down to the 7th index, which will be the 8th row. So how do we tell it how to go down to the 8th row? I'm going to say, well, row iterator is less than 8. Why? 0 is less than 8, 1 is less than 8, 2 is less than 8, all the way up to 7 is less than 8. And then it gets to 8 and it goes 8 is not less than 8. So I'm going to hit the number 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, but I won't hit the number 8. Well, how did I just go through 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7? I added 1 every time the loop runs. In order to tell it to do that, I'm going to say row iterator plus plus. Now, if this is running correctly, I should be able to console log out my row iterator and get 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And you notice I not only got 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, I also got it a bunch of times. Well, that's weird. Why? Well, look at where our for loop is running. Our for loop is not only running on its own, it's running each movie that we go over. So now we've got a nested for loop here. We're saying, hey, go over each movie, and each time you go over the movie, generate out 8 rows or run this loop 8 times. Okay. Well, if we're doing that, what do we want to do for each one of the rows? Well, each one of the rows we know is going to be another array. And inside that array, we want 8 seats, 8 columns going across. Well, in order to do that, we have to let our call iterator start at 0. And while the call iterator is less than 8, call iterator plus plus. Okay. Now we got to think about, all right, you got 3 for loops going on here. The first one is going over each one of the movies. The second one is generating out each individual row. And the third one is generating out each column. And we picked 8 because we want 8 by 8 seats to be generated. Okay. What does a seat look like? Well, the seat is going to be inside the row. So what we're going to do is say row.push. Add on to the end of the row. This is basically a way to add an item onto the end of an array. And what does that seat look like? Well, we just said that it's got to keep track of 2 pieces of information. It's got to keep track of whether or not the seat is occupied or selected. So we are going to push in occupied false. We are also going to push in selected false. Okay. It's a lot of theoretical here. Now let's see what's going on. So I'm going to come down all the way to the end of the for loop, and I'm going to log out my giant movies object. So I come over and I take a look and I pop open this movies object, and I still have my price and my seats, but I've got an array of 0. Nothing showed up in that array yet. Does anyone know why none of these for loops seem to be working?
Because they don't have their own variable outside, outside of the function.
Close. Yeah, pretty much. We made this let row. And we put all of this object data into the row. And then it got to these ending curly braces and was like, well, you did nothing with the row. So poof, gone, out of memory. Just like when we generate our HTML, we do this thing called let options. We build up all of the options here, but then we have to do something with it, right? Otherwise, it's just going to sit in our JavaScript memory. What we do with it is we take those options and we put it back into the movie dropdowns HTML. We need to do something similar down here. What we're going to do is we're going to say, hey, once you get all of the columns generated out, each one of the individual seats for this row, go to the movie data that we're currently on, that we're looping over right here, go to the seats, which is going to be this empty array up here, and push the row that we just generated here and put all of the seats on into the seats themselves. So I save, I come back over and I look in my console and look at that. I not only have my seats, but if I open up one of those seats, I see that these seats have their own arrays of 8 seats. And if I pop that open, all of a sudden, this starts to look like the data that I am trying to keep track of. Take a minute, read through this. Make sure you understand, hey, what's happening here? We go to the movies, we get the movie data from the first movie. So we've got Legally Blonde, the price is 8, and the array is empty. Okay. Oh, sorry. I think Legally Blonde. Yeah. Okay. So once we get that, we go, all right, this is where the data is going to get stored, right? This is our JavaScript memory. Okay. What do we need to do? Well, we need to generate out 8 rows worth of seats. So in order to keep track of each row, that row is going to get its own array. So what we do is we say, hey, start at 0 and run this loop 8 times. And each time you run the loop, add 1 to the iterator. So the first time this loop runs, the iterator is 0. 0 is less than 8. Because of that, we go in, we do the loop. Okay, is 1 less than 8? We add 1 to the iterator, 1 is less than 8. It is, we go through, we run everything inside this loop again. Okay, now add 1 to it. Now the iterator is 2. Is 2 less than 8? We keep on going through based off of these 3 parameters. Where are we starting the loop? That's 0. What happens each time the loop runs? We add 1 to it. And when should this loop keep running while row iterator is less than 8? We make our new array in here to hold all of the different seats. And then we say, hey, we need to go through and generate a seat for each column. In order to do that, we are going to do another for loop inside of this for loop. We go through, we generate out a new array for each row. Then we push into that row the data related to each seat. Once we generate out that row, we then take the new row with all 8 seats in it, and we push it into the seats that are coming from the movie that we're looping over for the original outer for loop. Okay. We put false in the second for loop. Are you asking about these falses? Okay, because when we first pull up the movie, we want there to be no seats selected and no seats occupied. We're actually going to come back to that and modify that in a second. But basically, when you open a movie for the first time, we don't want any of the seats to be occupied or any of the seats to be selected. Okay. We've got all of this in here. Now what we have to do is say, hey, when you click on one of these seats, set them to selected true. But before we do that, push yourself a little bit. How many times do you think this row.push is running? Okay, you said 8. It is running 8 times, but getting closer, it's not just 64 times, because for every row, we have to generate out 8 seats. So yes, we're getting closer 64 times because of this for loop. And then times however many movies we have up here. So we happen to have 4 movies up here. And because of that, what we can do is actually check ourselves and say, let inner loop counter equal 0. You don't have to follow me on this one. And in here, every time this for loop runs, we can say inner loop counter plus plus. That means when we log out when we're done with our for loop, we can log out our inner loop counter and get 256. Why 256? Because this loop runs for every seat going across. This loop runs for every row going down. And this loop runs for each one of the 4 movies we have loaded here. Because of that, this inner for loop is running 256 times. Do we have any questions about this for loop, how we figured out how it was doing, any questions about the data that it's generating, anything like that? What is your error message, Jen?
It's telling me on line 45 of the script that it's reading price. Cannot read properties of undefined reading price at movies drop down on change.
Is it inside
Share
the
your screen.
parenthesis? Because I made the same mistake too.
Selected movie. All right, a couple things that could be a problem. Let me request remote. And I'm going to take a look at how you're generating your value tags. And I don't see any problem there. You do have a price on each one of the movies. Movie data is coming from movie selected movie. Okay, so let me refresh this. Let me go live. And I'm going to pop open our console. And I'm going to pick a movie. And I don't see an error. So I'm going to guess that was an old error that you had because everything seems to be working.
Okay.
The only thing I can think of, maybe if we select this one, that's where we get the error
Okay,
because it doesn't have a price.
it was only showing me like Legally Blonde and then the price, and I was following along with yours, and it was showing you like the more than that. So I was like, maybe if I get off of the movie, it'll show me all of them when you console logged the movies.
That console log movies is hiding right here in this object. So if you
Ah.
pop that open, there's all the data I'm looking for.
Gotcha. Thank you.
No problem. Good question. All right. Anyone else have questions? Okay. So let's come in here. And what do I want to do? All right. What I'm trying to say is when a seat is clicked on, make it show as selected. Okay. So when I click on a seat, I want it to show up, and I will open mine so we can get an idea of what that looks like. When I pick on a seat, I want it to show up in blue, right? That's going to say, hey, that's what my seat looks like selected. Okay. So how do I do that? I'm going to say, hey, we are going to document dot get elements by tag name span. And this is going to get stored in something called all seats. And just to make sure that's working, I'm going to console log out my all seats. And what do I get? I get 64 individual seats. Okay. Well, what do I want to happen? I want to loop through each individual seat of all the seats because I can't apply an on click to all the seats all at once. Instead, what I have to do is say, hey, each individual seat, if you click on the seat, there's some event that's going to happen. What we're going to do is we're going to say, take whatever seat was clicked on and set selected to true. All right, kind of makes sense. So I come in here and I go, all right, I need to know what seat was selected. So I'm going to log out my event target value. Makes sense to me. I come over here, I select a seat, and I get undefined. That's not what I'm going for. Well, let's just log out the event target and see what happens. So I save that, I come in, I click on a seat, and I get span chair. And I'm like, all right, well, what if I click on this chair? I get span chair. I'm like, ugh, all right. How are we going to know which one of these chairs is clicked on? Well, to get the answer to that, we've got to think about how are we accessing each individual chair? How would we say, hey, go to the movies, and in the movies, go get Legally Blonde as the movie. Then go to the seats inside of Legally Blonde. All right, so let's make sure we're tracking this. Movies, Legally Blonde, seats. Okay, so let's just see what that looks like. So I'm going to console log out and I'm going to take these out for now, my movies, Legally Blonde seats. And I'm going to see what that looks like. Okay, there's an array, and inside that array, there are a bunch of other arrays. So if we zero index this and say, hey, 0 index going down and 0 index going over, what would the index be of this seat?
Zero comma zero.
0, 0 would be here. What is this one?
Oh, 1, 2.
1,
1, 3.
1.
1, 1. Sorry, but yeah.
Hold on.
So 0, 0, 0, 1, 0, 2, 1, 0, 1, 1, 1, 2. Right? We want to think about it as a grid. So if you want to think about it, it's always X coordinate first and then the Y coordinate second, right? The only difference is our graph doesn't start at the bottom left. Our graph is starting up at the top. So we're going 0, 0, 1, 0, 2, 0, 3, 0, and then going across. So we've got 0, 0, 0, 1, 0, 2, 0, 3. The
It's
way
like
that
reading.
what's that?
It's like reading from left to right.
Mm-hmm. So the way we use those coordinates is if we say, hey, go get me the first row of seats, we can say bracket 1 and look at what we get. We get another array. Well, inside this array, we said that we wanted to work on the second seat or the first index. Now we can say, hey, is that seat occupied? So I'm going to take this, I'm going to borrow this up here, And I'm going to say occupied equals true just to test. So now if I log out the first row of all of the seats, look what we get. Our first seat is now occupied. Now it doesn't show as occupied yet. We're going to get to that step next. All right, so this is how we have to work with our seats in order to update whether they are occupied or not. What pieces of information did we need in order to know what seat we're setting as occupied? There are 3 of them.
Movies value.
The selected movie.
Right.
The row that the seat is in that it was clicked on, and the column that it was in that it was clicked on. All right, well, let's break that down because we got to think like engineers here, right? Hey, tackling how to mark the seat as occupied all on its own, probably a little too tricky. So let's just take a step back and say, hey, can we mark a seat as occupied? Can we figure out what that syntax is? Now we've done that. We know what the syntax is. We know that the row goes here. We know the column goes here. We know the selected movie goes here. All right. Well, how do we know what movie is selected? Well, if we come up here, we can see that we've got our movie selection in this movie dropdown. And we know that if we use the movie dropdown, we can get the value from it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, hey, when you click on one of the seats, console.log the movie dropdown.value. Now I'm going to select a movie. I'm going to select a seat. And what do I get? I get Star Wars coming out. Okay, great. Now I know what movie is selected. Const movie selected equals my movie dropdown dot value. Okay, we got one piece of information. Now we run into how do we get our row and our column? Well, before we ran into an issue where when we change our drop down and clicked on something, we got too much information. We got the $10. How did we fix that? We used the value attribute right here to say, hey, keep track of just the movie title. What if when we were generating out all of our seats, we were able to keep track of what row and what column index we were on? Well, right now we're running into a problem where we've got all of this code repeated over and over and over again. What if we wrote a for loop that not only generated all of these chairs for us, it also kept track of another attribute on this span tag of what row and what column it represented? All right, that sounds like a lot. Let's try and get that working. So what I'm going to do is I am going to say, first of all, we need to say when a movie is selected, which is, we already have our on change here. When the movie is selected, we don't actually need to log out the price. We don't need to log out the selected movie. All we need is that movie data. And what we are going to do is we are going to use our object.entries again. What we are going to do is we are going to say for let the row index and the row of our object, of our object.entries movie data.seats. Sweet Lord, what is that doing? Okay, let's break that down. Movie data, where's movie data coming from? That is coming from our movies selected movie. Okay, dot seats, what is our dot seats? Our dot seats is our array of all of the different seats. Okay, what are we getting out of the entries of those seats? We're getting out the row index. What number row are we looping over right now? And the row of seats itself. To prove that, I'm going to console.log my row index and my row. Okay, I come over here and all I've got is this thing down on line 64 that I should probably comment out. So I come over here and nothing's happened. Well, that's because this for loop is inside our movie dropdown on change. So this for loop will only run when I choose a movie. Okay, now what it's doing, it's logging out 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And what are we getting access to? We're getting access to each row of the seats. So if we are looping over each row, makes sense that we have to loop over each column too. So I'm going to say, all right, let's take this out for now and let's do a for loop over our col index and col of object.entries. And now what do we want to loop over? We want to loop over each one of the rows seats. Okay. Going all right here. Now let's put it all together. What do we want to show up for all of the movies? We need to keep track of the seats HTML that should show up. Inside that HTML, for every row, we want the seats HTML to have a div added to it. All right, ground this in what we've already done. What we're saying is every time that we have a new row of seats, we have a div added. Now, each time that we have a new seat, every time we're going across the columns, we are going to take our seats HTML and we are going to add in a span with our chair. And once we've added in that span, we are going to say, once you've done all of the different seats, take the seats HTML and add in our closing div tag. Once we have done all of that work, we are finally going to document get element by ID, go up and get our seats, and inside the seats, we are going to set that to the seats HTML that we generated. backtick on 51, you could use regular quotes here. We're going to use the backtick because we're going to need that template literal in a second. All right, so I save, I come over here and I'm like, oh dear God, nothing has happened. Everything is exactly the same. I did all those for loops. I'm really confused right now as to what all those for loops are doing, and nothing's changed. Take a moment, go down to your for loop where we're generating out all of those seats and adjust one of these numbers to like 5. When I save and come over here and select the movie, look what has changed. So I'm going to take a moment, just get caught up on the code. Even though we don't have understanding of it yet, we still want to make sure our code is working. So I'm going to give everyone a minute, catch up on the code, and then we're going to do a step-by-step walkthrough of what in God's name is going on here. How is the computer reading this? Why did we need this code? All of that. We're going to do that in a second. But for right now, adjust one of your numbers down here to like 5, and then change your movie dropdown. Did you only get 5 rows of seats? I'm going to start a poll just to see where you guys are at. Sorry.
Why mine is not working?
Go ahead and share your screen.
Okay, 1 second. I tried to fix it, but
Okay. So you've changed your row iterator. That's good. You've got up here, request remote. Be careful what we're looping over here. So we're saying, hey, when the movie dropdown changes, go get the movie data, then go loop over each one of the rows. And as we're looping over each one of the rows, make a new div for that row, then loop over the columns of that row. So we get the call index, but we don't need this for loop in here. You've got one-to-many for loops going on there. So once we do all of the work of generating out that seats HTML, you miss the final step, which is, hey, go get the element by ID of seats and set the inner HTML of those seats equal to the seats HTML that we just generated. And there you go.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, mine's not working either.
Okay, share screens, take a look.
Yeah, so your code's on the left, mine's on the right. So trying to see.
Um,
Can you see?
Yep. I don't see any issues right off the bat, so let's switch over to the browser and see what's going on there. Okay, so select your movie first. And now you're good to go.
Wow.
We're gonna fix that. We're gonna fix that bug in a second.
That's crazy.
Mine shows up with like the 5 rows, but for some reason, the 8 rows below it don't disappear either. I think I forgot to delete something.
Interesting. Share your screen. Let's take a look. And Allie, I'll come to you next. Okay, add element by ID, seats HTML, opening div, closing div. Okay, I don't see any problems there. Go to your index.html. Do you have your div? Okay, so you've got your div ID seats on way too many divs. So I'm gonna fix it for you because it's gonna take a moment to fix by hand. What we should have is one big div ID with the seats on them, and all the other divs are supposed to be in that one div. So basically the seats contain all of the different rows of seats instead of each row getting its own seat. Okay, so let me save that. Now give it a try and see what happens.
I told myself last night because I was being lazy. I just copied and pasted it, but I forgot to delete the extra divs. Thank you.
No problem. Anyone else need help?
Yeah, it's saying my seats HTML is not defined, but I know I did the get element ID for it, so I'm a little confused.
Go ahead, share screen. Sorry, Allie and Rain. I'm coming to you next. Forgot your hands were raised. Okay, so okay, so be careful where you're doing this, because what's happening is we're doing all of the work inside of this function, but this whole line, the whole document get element by ID, has to be inside our function right here.
Oh, okay.
Because otherwise it doesn't get access to the seats.html outside of our onChange function.
All right. And now it's saying it's a different error. And it's saying it's not iterable.
Okay, so let me request remote. So one thing that you're missing is once we're done generating out each one of the seats, we want to add to the end of our seats HTML a closing div.
Oh, you have to do that on both of them.
What's that?
You have to do that on both of them. I didn't.
Just on the movie onChange, just when we're generating out the span. And then what was your error message?
It said, let's see if it's still there. it was saying not iterable. Yeah, it said the return value for objects.entries was not iterable.
Because you've got enter eRees. You need,
Yeah, entry.
oh,
They need a spell check on here.
see if that fixes it.
Yep, we're good.
Cool. Allie, what's up?
Thank you.
Okay, so I don't really think, I think my code is right. There's just something wrong with my CSS. So I'm not really sure if some of the stuff that I selected like just messed up.
Okay, share screen. Let's take a look.
I'm sorry. Hold on.
Interesting. Okay. Let me request remote. And let me just take a look at, you are missing your closing div tag here instead of an opening one. And that fixes it.
All right, thank you. I was looking through. I'm like, what's going on here? But all right, that makes sense.
No problem. Rain, what's up?
Sorry about that. I'm like doing 3 screens right now. Okay, so let me share my screen.
Sure.
It's saying I'm having an issue with line 87. Hold on 1 second. Excuse me. Oh, come on. Okay, let's go back over to the second screen. Do you have control over it? Or no?
No, but I'm looking at my code, not your code.
Okay.
Can you switch me over to your code? You there, Rain? Your internet may have dropped out. Okay, Amberlyn, I'm coming to you, and then Rain, if you connect back in, let us know. Oh, that's interesting. I can't even. Okay, there we go.
Ready?
Yep, go ahead.
Okay. I'm not sure if I'm lost or not. It is coming up with some kind of error.
Okay, share screen.
Thank you.
Okay, so you've got watch your error messages because it's telling you exactly what's wrong. What do you notice is not defined?
Seats,
Yep.
HTML,
Nope.
right? That one?
Yep. Read that out to me.
Okay. Seats, HTML is not defined.
Nope. Does that say seats HTML or does that say seats?
Yes. Okay. Please work. Okay.
Change your drop down and see if you get a different number of seats in the browser. There you go.
Okay. Thank you.
No problem. Anyone else need help? Okay, we are going to take our break a little early tonight. Pat yourself on the back if you got the code working. Don't be too frustrated if you don't understand what the code is doing. When we come back from break, we're going to go step by step through what the computer is doing, why it's doing it, and then go into getting it to work the way that we want. We just generated out a bunch of seats. We wrote a for loop that ran 256 times, and we wrote another loop that is now going through and generating out all of these span tags for us. And we're like, whoa, where does that leave all of us? So when we come back from break at 7:20, we are going to go through the code that we wrote and make sure we understand it before we move on to any other concepts. Go on break. See you guys at 7:20. Happening by going through it in the order that the computer is reading it, as opposed to the order that we wrote it, right? And so when we wrote this for the first time, there's a lot going on, right? And we're pushing it and we're doing for loops on for loops on for loops, and we're not really understanding maybe how that's happening. So let's take a breather. Let's go through our JavaScript and figure out what the computer is doing and the order that it's doing it. And Jen, I do have to look into why the seats kind of don't look the same when we change them. I don't have a good answer for you on that, so I'm going to have to look into that. Okay, Rain, before we dive in, do you need help? You're on mute, Rain, if you're trying to talk to us. Okay, I'm going to take that as a no and keep going here. Okay, so let's go dive into our code. The one thing we'll do before we go through the explanation is we did all of this work down here. Why did we do that? Well, partly it's an effort so we don't have to put all of these freaking chairs in here. So I can now go in. I don't want to delete my div ID seats, but I can delete everything that is inside that div ID seats all the way down to that closing div. Now look at how lightweight our HTML is. Well, that's actually a good thing because I don't want any seats to show up until you pick a movie. And when you pick a movie, that's when the seats pop in. Okay, how is it doing that? How does it know that those seats are there? How is it spacing out the columns? How is all of that working? That's what we really want to dive into. So we start at the top and we say console log, right? Let's watch some movies. Why did we put that there? This is just saying, number one, shows are JS is linked to our HTML page. Okay, now we come down. Number two, set up an object where each movie key, each movie title is a key, and the value is an object to store both the price and the array of empty seats. We haven't generated out the seats yet, but we just make an empty array here because we know before we can make the list of all the seats, we need the list itself so that we can add items to it. At any point here, please, please, please interrupt me and say, all right, let me try and say that my own way or ask any questions. This is only helpful to you if you guys understand it, right? So feel free to interrupt at any point. And Doug, can you drop the live share link into the chat when you get a chance? Oh, Tara beat you to it. Never mind. Thank you. Okay, so we make our object. Our object is keeping track of all of these different movies here. Inside the object, we're keeping track of two items, the price and the seats. Any questions so far? Okay, So now we come down and we say number 3, get the movie dropdown from the HTML using an ID. Say movie select. Right? This is reaching into our HTML and keeping track of what the movie dropdown is in our JavaScript. We're bridging the gap between our JavaScript and our HTML. Then we come down here and we say number 4, make a new string with an empty option. So when the page loads, the dropdown is empty. We use this string to generate out the HTML options using a loop below. This is kind of like we can't add items to the list until we have the list. We need something to keep track of all of our options. So as we're looping through them, we've got something to add those new options to. Now we come down and we say number 5, loop over each one of the movies by using object entries to get access to the key value pairs. Okay, what's that mean? We're coming up here, we're getting Citizen Kane and putting that in movie title, and then we're getting the price and seats and putting that in movie data. That means that we're getting each individual item here, and every time this loop runs, it's going through and dropping that in movie title and movie data. Now we come down and we say number 6, generate out the option HTML element using the movie title and movie data in a template literal. Also set the value to the movie title. So when it is selected, we know just the movie name, movie title, not the title with the price included. Feeling good so far? Okay, so now we come down and we say number 7, put the options we generated in number 6 into the inner HTML of the select tag. We do all of this work to generate out these options. Now we put it in the inner HTML. How do we know that's working? Because if we inspect this select, we can see the 4 options showing up here with our empty option. Well, wait a second. If we look in our HTML, the select has nothing in it. Well, it is using all of the items from our movie object up here to loop over each individual one, generate out the option for it, then using that generated options to put it into the inner HTML. Talk to me about this so far. How are we feeling about this? Okay so far? All right, so now we come down and nothing happens. We skip this step because the movie dropdown has not been changed. We're going to come back to this one. because all of this other stuff is happening when the page loads. So we're going to come back to this one in a second. We're going to come down here and it goes, okay, inner loop counter. Actually, we can comment that out for now. Just comment that out, comment that out. We're going to come down here and we're going to say number 8, loop over each one of the movies from the movies object at the start of the file. Use object dot values to get the right part of the object. We're using object dot values here because we know we need object dot something to loop over the object. What are we looping over? Do we need to get access to the keys, which are the movie titles? Do we need to get access to the values, which is the price and the seats? Or do we need to get access to both of them, at which point we use object.entries? In this case, we only need to get access to what is inside each one of the objects. We don't really care about what movie we're working on. All we need is the seats for each one of the objects. So because of that, in number 8, we're saying, hey, only loop over the values. Now we run into a problem because those seats are empty. And we've got to tell the computer, hey, we want 64 seats. But we don't just want 64 seats, we want 8 rows of 8 seats each. And so in order to do that, we need to tell the computer, run 8 times, and every time you run one of those 8 times, I need you to run another 8 times to generate out each seat inside of that row. That's exactly what we do down here. We say for each, number 9, for each movie, loop 8 times, I'm going to change my number there, loop 8 times to generate each row of seats. Number 10 is start the row out empty. Then number 11, run another 8 times for each row to generate out 8 seats. Now, once we get into those seats, what are we doing? Add onto the end of the row from number 10, a new seat that tracks the occupied and selected information. Number 13, after we have generated the 8 seats for this row, add the completed row onto our seats value from the movies object at the top of the file. Once we generate out all of the seats, once we've done 8 of them, we then take that completed row and we push it onto the seats from movie data that is coming from our movies that we are looping through up here. In other words, once we finish that row of 8 seats, take the entire row and add it to our grid of seats up here. If you get one thing from class tonight, it is understanding how we are generating out 256 seats. Why 256? 8 rows, 8 columns, 4 movies. So I'm going to leave this on my screen, read through this for a second, and see if just 8 through 13, if you understand what the curly braces are doing, why we have the iterators in there, what the plus plus is doing, how those curly braces are nested, all of that. This is a lot. A nested for loop is a lot, let alone a nested for loop in a nested for loop in another for loop. So just take a moment, read through these comments, and see if you have questions.
Max.
Yes.
So I'm kind of confused on 13.
Okay.
Like,
So
I'm not.
okay, so what we're doing is this inner for loop is running for each row, right? So we're going across, we're generating out each 8 of the seats. And we're like, great, we've got this row. So think about it as like the seat installer, right? You are working in a movie theater. You say, all right, I've screwed these 8 seats into the floor. And they're like, well, they're like, all right, now where do you want me to put these 8 seats? They're together as a row, but where do you want me to put them? Do you want me to take them into the Legally Blonde movie theater? Do you want me to add them to other rows? What do you want me to do with that? And so that's exactly what we do here. We say, hey, go take that row that you just finished and add them on at the end to the seats that are already in the movie that we're looping over.
Okay.
So first time this runs, we are on movie data. What's the first movie? It's Legally Blonde. So it goes through and it goes, all right, I know you want me to run 8 times for this row. I know you want me to run 8 times to generate out the columns. Great. Now I've got my first row of seats. What do you want me to do with that? I want you to take those seats here. Sorry, I was on the wrong part of the screen. And I want you to add them on to the seats in this movie. So it goes, well, there aren't any rows in here yet, so I'm the first row, yippee. Okay, now it comes down and it goes, all right, I need more rows. So it comes down here and now row iterator is 1. And it comes down here and it builds out 8 more seats, right? It adds them in and it goes, now I've got another row of seats. What do you want me to do with these? I want you to take that new row of seats and add it on to the row that we already added from the last time this loop ran. And it goes, great, there's already another row in there. I'm going to add that second row. It goes through all the way until it's got all 8 rows generated here. And it says, great, I've added in all of those seats. Now I'm done running this loop. What do you want me to do next? I want you to move on to the next movie. So now it moves on to Star Wars. And all of the rows it's generating with all of those columns in it are getting added to the seats here. Now, you may get that conceptually, but you're like, Max, how in God's name would I know that that's actually working? How could I visualize what that data is? That we can do because if we come down after all of these seats are generated and log out our movies, let's take a look at what's in it. Because when we started this, all of the seats were empty, right? There was nothing in them. We had to make all of those seats from scratch using the for loops. But if we come back over and now look in our console, we not only see, do we have seats in here, but if we open one of these, we can see each row of the seats showing up. And not only can we see each row of the seats, we can see the objects that are inside of those seats. Inside those arrays, I should say. Does that help? All right, did we get at least one light bulb moment here? Feeling like we're understanding the generation maybe a little bit? All right, so this is on the data side of things. We haven't touched any HTML. We haven't touched anything. All we did is do this in the JavaScript. So now it's like we got to do something with this. So the computer gets down to here after number 13. And it says, all right, what now? Well, what it does is it waits for number 14. And number 14 says, when a movie is selected, what do? We, number 15, figure out what was selected in the dropdown. Then number 16 is using the info from 15, go back into the object from number 2 and select only the movie that was selected in the dropdown. In other words, hey, whatever movie got selected, just pull that object's worth of information. Jen, if you have an occupied true, that's okay in the console. At some point, we were just playing around with that. Don't worry about that for now. Okay, so what problem are we trying to solve with this movie on change, right? Let's not lose track of the big picture here. The big picture here is all of that data sitting in our JavaScript array. We need that JavaScript array to generate out some HTML so our end user can see the actual seats here. So we say, all right, now that we've got the data, now that we've got the seats, number 17, make an empty string for us to store the HTML we're about to make. So now we come down here and we go, great, number 18, another fucking loop. All right, what are we looping over here? We come down here, we go to movie data. That is coming from number 17 using number 16's seats data. Loop over each row of seats to give us the index and row. So we not only want each individual row, we want to know what index of the row that we're on, and we can do that because we're using object.entries. So now we say number 18, number 19, add on a div that will hold the row of seats. Then number 20, loop over each individual seat in the row. And 21, for each seat, add a span tag. Then 22, once we have looped over and added all the span tags for the seats, add the closing div to number 19 to finish out the row. Number 23, after we have looped through each seat in the whole theater, take the HTML we generated on 19 through 22 and put it into the HTML seats div. Okay, take one more minute, read through this, see if you can understand 1 through 23. If you've got a question, if you don't understand a part, it is totally okay to say, Max, you are really shit at commenting. I need you to explain this another way. Plush.
What I don't understand is in your line 66, why did we use the word row instead of row index in there, inside the object.entries brackets, parentheses?
Yeah, so we want to loop over the data itself, right? So we don't want to loop over just 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. We want to get access to the occupied and the occupied and the selected. So if I console log out the row here and I select a movie, we can see this is the array that I want to loop over. Now, what I want to loop over is each individual object to here. And when I get the object, that's going to go into col. And then the index of that object is going to go into col index.
Oh.
So basically what I'm doing is I'm saying, hey, on this one, we're going down and we're getting each individual row. On this for loop, I am now going across and getting each individual seat. But because I'm using dot entries, I'm getting two pieces of information. I'm getting the index of each individual seat, and then I'm also getting the seat itself, which is going to be in col here.
Right. What is actually in, if we console log out movie data dot seats at this point, before, like right after the first for loop statement, like what does it contain at this juncture, like at this point in the code?
So the seats will always include the 8x8 array,
which we have done lower in this file, like when we go at the bottom of this file.
Correct. Yeah, so if you look, it's just an array of arrays. And if you look in the array of arrays, you can see all the rows, all the columns, and the columns are representing each individual seat.
So it does not matter if we place that for loop, which we use to add occupied false, selected false in these seats at the bottom of the page or above this for loop.
It would actually probably be better to take this whole movie on change and put it at the bottom, because this on change will not run until after one of these has been selected as opposed to this down here, which will run as soon as the page loads.
Got it.
So yes, you are correct. This on change could be moved to the bottom of the page and it would not impact the order that the code runs.
One last thing is like, can you please log out, like, say on line 64, log out row index and see what's in there?
I'm going to take it a step further. I'm going to, inside of our for loop, I'm going to log out both the row index and the column index. And now when we select a movie, 0, 0, 0, 1, 0, 2, go through the row, get all of the columns, and once we are done with that row, move on to the next row and deal with all 8 seats in that row.
The only thing I'm not getting is like, where is this? Because the loop is pulling out what's in the seats, what's in movie data.seats at this point, which is just an object, which is
just an array.
Just okay. It's an array.
Oh, the seat is the object. The object is in an array for the row, which is in another array to hold all the rows.
Gotcha. Understood. Understood. So seats at this point is an object. On line 61.
On line 61, it's an array of arrays.
Okay.
It's an array of arrays that hold an object.
So Max, can you say that when you do object entries on an array, the key portion is the index of the
Correct. Correct.
So it's completely different from when we did object.entries on an object.
Which is giving you the key as a string as opposed to the index as a number.
Gotcha. Understood. Yes, it makes more sense now.
And I wonder, yeah, array.entries is not a thing, but object.entries is, which is very freaking confusing because we're using object.entries on an array. So I'm not really sure why you can continue to use object.entries, but there's something built into object.entries that says, oh, if you're doing this on an array data type instead of an object data type, the key will, an index will be used instead of the key.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Gagan, what's up?
So I'm confused about the same thing, but the row index, right? Is there like a term in JavaScript that we cannot change? So it pulls out only numbers out instead of string? Or is it like we define this, but how, if we define this, how does it know that what to get out?
So object.entries knows to put out either the index or the key as the first item in the array and puts out the data that is inside of that index as the second item of the array. It knows to give us row index as a number if the parameter we give it has a data type of array. It knows to give us the key if the data type that we give it in the parameter is an object.
So row index and row are like basically like we use in the Bootstrap in HTML, that it knows which way to go and which way to grab.
Yeah, it's similar to what did we use object.entries in before? It's basically just destructuring whatever's coming out of this object.entries into our two different variables.
Okay. Okay.
All right. This was a ton of work. Don't let the terms give you too much anxiety, Jen. We still have a fair amount of projects to go here, right? more important that you can take this code and could you explain this to someone? Right? And if you want to do one-on-one with me and just say, all right, just pull up your code, let's walk through this, let me try and explain it, that's totally fine. That's what we're trying to get ourselves to, right? And if you're struggling on terms, you can rewatch tonight's video, or even better, go through the transcript, right? Because then it's all text-based anyway, and go, all right, I'm going to write down all the different terms that pop up. Then I'm going to try and define all the different terms that pop up. Then I'm going to send that to Max, and Max is going to modify the terms that pop up. And then I'm going to send that to all the other students so they can benefit for all the work that I did, right? These terms are tricky, right? There are a lot of them, but you start getting to the point of going, all right, object, curly braces, know that, key value, all right, know that, all right, how do we iterate through them? We use indexes. Indexes are used for arrays. All right, I got that, right? Like it does start to click and come together, but you can push yourself, delete out all of my comments, but leave the numbers on them. Then you're not tripping yourself up on the order of things. You're just going number to number and then going, all right, how did we get to this number? What's going on in this line of code? Now that I know that and I can get that in my head, can I try a for loop on my own? Can I come up with my own little data structure and see if I can loop over it to generate that out? That is totally, totally fine. And Rain, that's a great idea, right? Like little side projects to push yourself here, totally fine. I still have not figured out what the homework is going to be for this week, but figuring out how to get it to stick, how to get it to sink in, figuring out how to get the light bulb moment out of it, that's the challenge, right? And so we're going to do more projects, but you're noticing here, there aren't new concepts really coming up. Okay, object.entries maybe a little bit, but those for loops that we talked about 3 weeks ago, they aren't going anywhere, right? These functions that we did for the on-click, they are not going anywhere, right? We're reaching the point where there's not new syntax. It's just a matter of how do we use the syntax to do what we want now. Goggin, what's up?
So only thing I'm getting stuck on is the row index and row. If you maybe try to explain it one more time, and how did he use them and why did he use them, maybe we'll click.
So we aren't using row index yet. We will be in a second, but let's look at what happens when we console log out just row index. So I log out row index, I select a movie, and what do I get? I get 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, why? Because if we look at our movie data dot seats, what are we getting? We're getting this array. And so the point of this loop is to loop over each individual array in this list. So this is index 0, this is index 1, index 2, all the way through to index 7. So why do we get 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 6, 7? Because it's not an object. We're not getting keys of each one of those entries. Instead, we're getting the index, the number that that data is sitting in. Okay. Okay, so far?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, what about the data inside that? How do I get each individual array here? Well, instead of using row index, which is going to give me the 0 through 7, instead, I'm going to just use row. Now look what comes out when I select the movie. Not only do I see the array that's holding everything, I'm seeing each one of the arrays for each row of seats. So now I'm not getting an array of arrays, I'm getting the first array in the list. That's the row. As opposed to the array of arrays, which is the grid.
So we
when
want the the inner data basically to get out from.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes. So what I'm getting out here is index 0, which is the array of 8 items. We then see that again down here. So instead, I can log out my call. And what I'm going to get is, instead of an array of 8 items, I'm going to get each individual seat, because I'm getting that individual item out of the array of 8 items.
Okay, now it makes sense.
Cool.
Now it makes sense.
Okay. We're almost at the finish line tonight. I know we're hitting a saturation point. All I want to do is make it so when I click on a seat, that one stupid seat turns blue. We can do it. We ready?
Yep.
We're going to go down. And actually, we're going to, on our span, when we generate out the chair, all I want to do is say, on click of the chair, go run a thing called seat clicked, and give us access to the event of that clicking. And when that happens, go run this thing called seat clicked and give us access to that event. But we need a little bit more than just the seat clicked. We need to tell it, when you generate out this seat clicked, I also want you to keep track of 2 pieces of information: the data row index, which is going to equal our row index, and our data call index, which is going to equal our call index. And I'm just going to move this on multiple lines just so it's a little bit easier to read. Now you may be going, sneaky, sneaky, because what did I do? I slipped in the template literal here. I can only use this template literal because I used a backtick here. That means that if any of you need to screen share and your problem is that you do not have a backtick here and a backtick here instead of a single or double quote, you're going to get Batman slapped because you are not using the backticks. You cannot use the $ curly brace literal, template literal, unless you have your backticks in here. Now, because I have that in there, my data row index, my data call index, and I've added my on click of the seat clicked event, when I come down to my seat clicked event, what I should be able to do is say, go get my row index by going to the event target and get the attribute called data row index. Also, go get the call index event target get attribute data call index. And finally, console log the row index and the call index. So I save that, I come over here, I pick my movie, I'm going to pick some random seat, and look what comes out, index 5, 6. If I click on another seat, I get 1, 1, and if I click on the top seat, I get 0, 0. All right, still not turning blue, but I do have my first index working. while you're working on that, I'm going to say add a span tag and include the row and col index. So when they are clicked on, we know which one was clicked on. Then all the way down here, 24, when a seat is clicked on, Corwin, that's probably a problem with that link tag up at the top. You may want to just copy my link tag in the head and paste it on top of your link tag and see if that fixes it. And again, our goal here is go to the drop down, pick a movie, then go click on a seat and see if you get the row index and the column index to log out. The wind just shifted and my room got about 10 degrees colder, and I am so happy right now. All right, so just make sure that you can kind of trickle down through what's happening here. We put these two pieces of information onto the attribute. This attribute is pulling in the row index and the column index from our loops up here. Our loops are keeping track of what chair number we're on and dropping that into the HTML. Then this on click here is firing off the seat clicked. The seat clicked comes down and gives us access to the event. We then use the event and get the target that the event was on, the chair that it got clicked on, and we get out the row index and the col index from our data up here. Finally, we log out the row index and the col index down here. Anyone need help? Anyone not understand the flow? Anyone need another minute? Anyone not get it working?
My chairs are still playing games.
Okay.
Yeah,
There's
pretty
me. Let's
ears
see.
talking crazy to me right now. But you can go
Okay.
first.
Thanks. Like it's weird because it's like everything is showing up, but it just says chairs.
Share screen. I think it's just a problem with that link tag. And
All
I
right.
think I know what it is now.
All right.
And Kenny, I'll go back through it again.
Do you want to see? Well, I'm gonna show you all. I'll talk about first. Hold on. So boom. There go that chair.
Well, you got your chairs. I don't know what your problem is.
I was like, it could work technically speaking, but I figured you probably wanted something a little different. Let me switch back over to the other one.
So two places that could be a problem. One is going to be in your index.html. So let me request remote. And the problem was something with this, and all of that actually looks okay.
Yeah, I went through and actually copy and pasted yours after you said
okay.
And still did the same.
So in here, you've got an extra quote that's throwing your chairs off. Give it a try, see if that fixes it.
Yeah. All
right.
That's crazy.
Mo, do you need help?
Yeah, hold on. Let me share my screen.
Go for it.
I I know it's gonna be on my spelling or something. I just know it. I just don't know what I meant.
So we've got a
Uh,
stray backtick right here. Prettier is not mad at you
man,
anymore.
wow, I'm so mad. All right.
People ask me all the time, like, how do you superhumanly find the error so quickly? Practice. A lot of practice. You pick up on where that first red squiggly is. It takes time, but all the TAs can attest to that. They go through the program and they're frustrated that I can fix it so quickly. And then they start reading other people's code and they realize that they can fix it almost as quickly as I can. That happens. Just practice.
I still
Okay.
find myself scratching my head sometimes.
All right, let me go through this one more time. So what we are saying is we do all of our loops, right? We got a ton of loops going on. We say when the movie drop down is changed, loop through the seats on the movie that got selected, go get me each individual row. Once we get each individual row, we've got to go through that row and generate out each one of the columns. And for each one of those columns, each one of the seats, what do we want to show up? We want a span tag to show up, but we need some dynamic information in here. So instead of concatenating a bunch of strings together, what we do is we use this backtick here. That is our template literal. Inside that template literal, we give it 4 pieces of information. We tell it, hey, when this span is clicked on, what do I want you to do? I want you to go run the seat clicked function down here. Okay, when that seat is clicked on, give it the event information. What information do we need to know to be able to know which seat got clicked on? We need to know 2 pieces of information, the row index and the col index. In order to know what those actual values are, we use the curly braces here, the $ and the curly braces, and say, hold up, I want you to actually go get the row index and drop that in. Where do I get that row index from? I get it from my loops up here. I do that same thing. The col index is coming from my col index up here. I then finally give it the class so that the icon knows, hey, this is an icon. And finally, I tell it what icon to show up. That means that if we come over here and take a look at any one of these individual chairs, look at what's showing up in my HTML. I now not only have the on click, I now see the row index and the col index showing up in there. And if I pick some other random chair, you can see the row index and the col index getting added. Kenny, did that help?
Yeah, that makes sense now.
All right. We're so close. I just wanted to turn blue when I click on it. We've done so much work and it's still not turning blue. Okay, all we need to do is say, hey, we know what movie is selected because we've got the movie drop down value. We're going to go all the way back to this example. We're using this as a reference. We're saying, hey, we know how to set a seat as occupied. I'm going to go to my movies. I'm going to get the movie that is selected. I'm going to get the seats out of that movie. And I'm going to use the row index and the col index that we pulled out of the attributes that are coming from when we generated out all of those seats. And then once I know what seat it is, I'm going to set that sucker to occupied. And I do that by saying, I'm sorry, not occupied, selected is true. I save, I come over, I pick my seat, and nothing happens. And I'm like, all right, what's happening here? What happens if I console log out my movies, my movie selected, and my seats? I come in here, I go to Legally Blonde, I click on my first seat. Oh, my bad. Movie selected should be in here. Click on that. I click on my seat. Nothing changes yet. But if I come in here and I look at my array, look what I have. Got selected true. I close that again and I pick the second row and the second seat in. If I look, pop open my array, go to the second row and look at my second seat at index 1, I've got selected true. Okay. So we're close. We've got to be really close, right? Our data is updating. Everything looks right here. But I still don't have a blue seat. So what I'm going to do is come up back to my for loop up here. And inside this class, I am going to say, put in another template literal. And if this call is selected, then put in the word selected. And I'm actually going to do this as, no. Otherwise, don't put anything in. Whoa, whoa, whoa. That just sounded like an if statement. What just happened there? Hold your horses. We used our template literal. We know what our template literal does, but we just used an inline ternary operator. What is an inline ternary operator? It's just an if statement. All that it does is it says, if this part is true, then put this word selected in. If it's not true, put these quotes in. So always use material symbols outline, then check to see if this seat is selected. And if it is, put in the class selected. Otherwise, don't put anything in. Well, we're using a new class. So we've got to define that class in our CSS. So we head over to our CSS and we just throw in a little selected that turns the color blue. Abadi abada. Okay, so we added in our selected. Jen, oftentimes you need an if statement if what you're trying to do is multiple lines of code long, or you're trying to do like a logic flow. The ternary operators are kind of more helpful in like a string when you're trying to do an operation inside a template literal. But when you're doing an if statement that has like complex logic associated with it, that's when you want to use your if statement inline. So this is kind of like a handy shortcut. But we could write that with an if statement if we wanted to. It would accomplish the same thing. Okay. I've added in my blue. I've not only put in my ternary operator for selected, I have also gone to my style.css and created a class called selected that turns the color blue. I come back over to my browser, pick Legally Blonde, I click on a seat and I'm like, that thing is still not blue. And I'm so mad, and I like go to another movie theater and I come back to Legally Blonde and oh my God, the seat is blue. What just happened there? All right, I'm just going to click on a bunch of different seats and I'm going to move to a different movie theater and come back to this one. And all the seats that I clicked on are blue. My God, it took us 3 hours but when you click on a seat, it finally turns blue. Tomorrow, we will fix that bug. Tomorrow, we will make it so that when you click on the seat, it immediately turns blue. We will learn how to randomize our data to show seats as occupied. And we will make it so that when you click on the seats, we can keep track of the price of your movie ticket. Today is the worst of it. Today is the hardest day in the entire program. Go back through. I'm going to post these comments. I'm going to get this up to GitHub right after class ends. Go back through, read through all the numbers, make sure you're understanding those numbers as we go. Goggin, what's up?
I'm getting an error. I don't know.
Share screen.
1 second.
Kenny, you said might have to redo alone for practice. I will say a lot of the best students go back through and redo this. Either, the weekend following to make sure it's all sinking in, or they save them all up until the end of the cohort. And after graduation, they just go through and cherry pick which projects they like the most. And that's how they get practice with it. Okay, movie selected is not defined on 89. You are missing my line 88. So I have a const movie selected equals movie dropdown dot value.
Oh, this one?
Yep.
Oh, shit. How did I forget that? Okay, perfect.
That is all that I've got for class tonight. If you can choose a movie, click on a seat, change it to a different movie, then go back to your original movie and see that it is blue. You are done for the night. Get out of here. Go recharge your brain, go practice, and I will see you guys tomorrow for the grand finale. Amberlynn.
What was the last thing you said right after it didn't work? That made it.
Change the movie to a different movie in the dropdown, and then go back to the movie that you were on that you clicked on the seats.
Okay, it's still not turning blue. Thought
Okay,
it would work.
share your screen.
Okay.
Oh my God, guys, I just realized that today is day 3, not day 2. Sorry, I'll rename those folders at the beginning of class tomorrow so it lines up with what's on the schedule. My bad. Okay.
Still day 2 because we were missing day 1 on Monday, right?
Yeah, but I normally do day 2 is Tuesday and day 3 is always Wednesday. I normally just skip the whatever day we had off. So sorry, I'll make that align by tomorrow's class. Okay, so I'm gonna request remote. I don't see anything immediately wrong. Let's just take a quick look at your row index, your col index. I don't see anything there. I do see that you've got sected instead of selected.
Yes. Okay.
You're good to go.
Thank you.
No problem.
Yeah, mine won't show up blue either, and I feel like you're gonna embarrass me again. But let's go for it, right?
Raise your hand because Rain's up next, and then I'll come to you
Oh,
next.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Rain.
Hi, Max. Sorry about earlier. Our power cut on and turned off in the whole neighborhood. So sorry about that. But anyhow, I'm having a similar issue to Amberlynn. So let's share that screen so we can get out of here. Bam.
Go for it.
All right.
All right, so line 75 reading seats. So let's go to 75 and take a look.
Okay. Which screen? I have a couple of screens going. Which screen can you see? Both of them?
I can see what the entire monitor of what's on Rain Cinema. So if you want to drag your code over to this monitor, that might be easier.
Okay, hold on.
Yep, that's perfect.
I'm sorry, Power's playing in the background. My family's watching it. Sorry about that. All right.
It's going to make for an interesting transcript of tonight's class. Okay.
But it wasn't tough. But anyhow, okay, so when I go live.
Yes, he is. You saying you have something to do with that?
Alexa, pause. When I initially go to the page, it shows nothing. And then when I click, it shows nothing. I have to do it a few times. Let's go to Charles Bronson Kick Ass. Then it shows. And I still can't select anything.
Okay. Let's just start with the select issue and then I got a bad feeling that one issue is causing the other issue though. So let's just take a quick look. Row index, col index, seat clicked, span, everything looks good there. Seat clicked. We're missing a couple lines of code in here. So we gotta say movie selected equals the movie drop down dot value. And then here we say movies, go get the movie selected.
Thank you.
And in the seats, use the row index and the col index to set the selected equal to true. And I click on one, I go to another, and I come back to this one. And okay, and it's still not blue. So let's just take a quick look at our console and movie selected line 102. This one? Nope, sorry. My bad.
I'm in my pajamas.
Okay, sorry. Did not mean to do that for you. Movie. Oh, no, sorry. This should say movie drop down. Thought I was switching to the right window there. Clearly did not. All right, I go to that one. I click on the seat. I get no error. I go to this one and I come back to this one. And that should have worked. Okay, so selected true.
And just let you know, I had moved selected earlier. I was highlighting stuff and I kind of deleted that section. So apologies.
We're missing one more thing up here. We say if this column is selected, then add in the class of selected. Otherwise, don't add anything in. And you got your selected in the style, which is good. And I've got a good feeling that this is going to work. And you're good to go.
All right, thank you. Have a good night.
The other bug that you're having, I'm pretty sure is because the movie title has quotes in it. So we can solve that a little bit later. If you use anyone except your first movie, I think it will work.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Have a good night.
You too.
Corwin.
I'm back.
Take a look.
Yeah, let's get it. Let's get it up here. I'm gonna show you what's it's saying first. Down here. It says it's not defined.
Okay, 107. So let's take a look.
All right, let me change over to the other one. Make it full screen.
107 is comment that one out.
This
Oh,
one?
wait, no. That should be in your on change. Yeah, comment 107 and 108 out because you're already doing it on 86 and 87.
Mm-hmm.
So save
See
and that
that?
might fix your problem.
It says the left-hand side in assignment. There's an invalid left hand. Data row index.
What's an invalid left hand?
Yeah, I don't. It says line 2. I did something wrong in line 2 apparently.
Line 2?
Yeah. I was like, that doesn't make any sense. That's why I kept getting confused because I kept going back and trying to change stuff. I was like, all right, this doesn't. I was like, what? Line 2.
Let me see that error.
Yeah, I got you. Here, I'm just gonna bring it over here. Oh, will it let me transfer it over here right now? Oh no, it's not gonna let me transfer it over.
If you swipe up and go into like mission control, you might be able to
Oh,
drag it. There you go.
yeah.
And then, yeah, just switch it. Invalid at index. Oh, okay, I think there's a, oh, no, sorry. I wanted to request remote. Request. If I, will it let me, come on. Drag that up a little bit. I'm gonna go back to console. Okay, no error. We pick a movie. We select it.
Yeah, it doesn't do until I
Okay,
go to
so it's
select something.
on the select. So let's go to the on select code, which is seat clicked, movie drop down, value, get, movies, movie seats, row index, column index selected true. I'm missing something really stupid here.
Yeah, see, if you're missing it, that's why I was like, I was over here discombobulated. I've been staring at my screen. I'm like, dude, what does this even mean?
The error is
Oh.
not talking about the index HTML, is it? When it says index,
Nope, it's talking about you missing a quote right up here, so it can't figure out how to fire off the on click. That was a good error that
Let's go.
totally would have sent
Okay.
you down a goose chance if
Oh my
There you
god. It's appreciated. Like, cause I've been on this for like the past like 10 minutes.
so that you can see my debugging process there a little bit, which is
Yeah.
almost more valuable to learn throughout this course than the code itself. I'm going, all right, when is that error showing up? Right. So I'm like, all right, everything works fine until we click on the seat. So I'm like, it's got to be an issue with the on click. And once I read through your on click code, I said, oh, all of this is fine. Let's take a step further back. How does that on click happen? Let's go up and look at your on click and see if you missed a parenthesis or an event or something like that. And in that case, it was just the closing quote to say, hey, this is the name of my on click.
These quotes, man. These quotes.
Asmo, what's up?
Can I share my screen? I just want you to walk me through how I click to get the blue buttons on my seats.
Yep, sure. I realized the color of my shirt and the color of my background were almost the same all night. It's kind of funny.
Okay.
Okay, so click on a seat. Then click on go to the drop down and change the movie. Then click on the drop down and go back to Legally Blonde. And you got your blue seat, so you were all caught up.
You just kind of click through and then go to another movie and then come back to the previous movie to find the blue mark.
Yep.
Okay. Awesome. All right. Thank you.
No problem. Palash, what's up?
Matt.
Oh, and then Mel will come to you next.
Okay, so I just want to go over the selected class that you added in your, I think, line 72. So what is happening here is call at the on this line, on line 72, call contains that object which I like selected false, clicked the other false. And now it's picking up on that object. So call dot selected, which is false initially. And now you're adding the ternary to say if it's selected, then add the class selected. If not, then do not add any class, and you're declaring it in CSS.
You got it.
Got it. And the blue seat not showing up instantly, is it something to do with the order of the code? It's
Spoiler for tomorrow. It has to do with the fact that when we use that HTML code, when we generate out all those spans, we're only doing it during the on change. So that's the trick of why it's working, is if we change the movie and then change it back, it's rerunning that on change code, rerunning the for loop, seeing that the data had changed in the for loop. And because of that, it is now regenerating the HTML with the seat selected. So the solution for tomorrow will be to refactor our code to move that HTML generation from the on change to a function, and then we can call that function both in the on change of the select and on the click of the seat.
Got it. Thank you.
Mo, what's up?
Actually, I got it. I did it from back and forth, so I seem selected. So I should be good.
Awesome. Good work.
All right. Have a great night.
Thanks, guys. See you tomorrow.